Hey, how's it going? And today I thought it'd be good to do a video on Octane Render in LightWave, getting started with Octane Render in LightWave, because it looks like LightWave Digital has or is solidifying a relationship with Octane Render so that it will be the GPU rendering solution that LightWave will have, which is fantastic because I know a lot of LightWavers use Octane Render. I've had it, but I've never really used it that much, and so now I'm really jumping into it and trying to figure out how to use it, since it is the fastest way to get things rendered out. It's not necessarily a perfect solution, but it's pretty good. So to get started in this, I'm just in Layout 2020, and I've got a Mixamo character and I've got a cube in the scene. I'm going to assume that you've already got the plugin loaded into your system and it's ready to go. I'll put a link in the description to a tutorial on how to get started with installing it if you don't have it installed. But once you've got it installed, this is where you should be. And there should be a tab up here that says Octane. And we'll just kind of go over these 4 tabs. The first thing is this Octane Render. The first tab is basically you've got to enable the plugin to get started. So just click that. It may prompt you to log in to your Octane account, and so go ahead and do that. I don't know if it'll be that way in the future, but that's the way it is right now. I had to log in to get it officially enabled. And then there's some plugin options here. I believe that we have here, you could check to see that your GPU is showing up. And if you have multiple GPUs, it'll give you the option to select which one that you want to use. And then under this tab for options, it's a good idea to make sure reload scene, also reload image maps, and open update the node editor while picking are selected. And then this small preview window too. That's real handy to have those enabled. And so that's the first tab. The render target is really interesting. This is basically the global settings for Octane Render. Once you enable Octane Render, it basically kind of takes over the rendering functions on your system on LightWave. It takes over the rendering functions, and basically it switches engines from the CPU to the GPU. You still retain some control over your LightWave functions, but Octane Render becomes the main show in town. And so you'll see this render target. Just think of it as these are your global settings. All these things are the key areas: camera, environment, imager, kernel, post-processing, render passes. And all you have to do here, if you want to familiarize yourself, is just right click and go to node menu and then just click default setup, and it comes in all wired up for you, and you can just literally click on each one of these and see what settings are available. One thing I will note is that I thought there was something wrong here, but the camera hooked up, they call it thin lens. These are your camera settings here, but one of the things is that this line is very, very faint, and I didn't see it. I thought it wasn't plugged in, but it is plugged in. But I don't know if there's a way to make that line appear a little, stand out a little bit more, but that was throwing me off because I thought it wasn't plugged in, but it is plugged in. And we'll come back to this in just a minute. So these are, just think of these as your global rendering settings there. And then here, the IPR stands for Interactive Preview Renderer, and this is basically allows us to see our scene. And there is our scene right there. Surprisingly, this is showing in focus. But if you have an issue with this, now if you're in this window, let me just say a couple things about this real fast. So if you're in this window, you can left click and drag and kind of go up or down and move around. But if you come over here, target will focus on whatever item is selected in the scene. And perspective, if you hit perspective and then you hit alt and left click and drag, you can orbit around your items here. Now if you come into, now I can't left click and drag in that mode, so I'd have to go back to camera here to left click and drag in my scene. Now if you come into the scene and it's not in focus, and that's why I say I'm surprised it's in focus, because it hasn't been in focus lately, is we would just go into the render target here, open the editor, and under here there's an option to, it's on autofocus right now, but if you click that off, you can then select the item in the IPR window to focus it. And if you just play with your focal depth, you should be able to get it in focus. And you'll see that it seems to have a very shallow depth of field. But this is the setting you'd use to get it in focus if it's not in focused. There is that. So we'll go back to our IPR window. And let's say I like the way things look. Here, I think I get a message. I was getting a message saying that there is no... So it's interesting because Octane Renderer is recognizing the standard materials that are on these objects, but it's really meant to work with its own materials and things like that. So like Octane Render does not recognize LightWave lights. So you'll notice over here on Octane Tools, you have an option to add an Octane light if you want. And then here you can switch to LightWave rendering, or you can switch back to Octane rendering here. And then matte material conversion is really helpful because that allows you to swap out materials relatively quickly. And we'll go through an example of that real shortly. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of everything. Reload is if there's a change made in your scene, you hit reload and it'll reload, refreshen the changes that you made. And then we already looked at camera. And then a lot of these I think are pretty self-explanatory. Region lets you select, highlight a region just to focus on and things like that. And as far as I know, that's pretty much it. So now let's say I wanted to render this out. You should see what you see is what you kind of get here. So if I come to render here and go render frame, you'll see that I have the option here to save out a still image, and I would use my normal settings to just render out. So these still work within LightWave, the render frame and render scene settings. So those are still available to you in Octane Render. So as I mentioned before, a lot of these things need not LightWave, but Octane Render materials to work appropriately, and so we would want to swap this standard out. So let's look at our mix mode character, and we'll take a look at this real fast. So if I go into the surface editor here, you'll see that I'm in the standard material here. So let me just select the standard beta surface there. And then if I go into, let's see, where am I going to go? I got that selected. Oh, I'm going to come over here on the Octane Render tab, Octane Render Tools, and go Material Conversion. I can select what kind of material I want to swap to, whether diffuse, glossy, or specular. And let's say I'll do specular, and then I'll go on selected surfaces, and I'll go OK. And then it's automatically swapped out those materials. So this is a really fast way to do your material conversion just to get those nodes in place. So I'll just do diffuse materials there and I'll go OK. And now those materials have all been swapped out. So if I come back and look at it, I got to go into Open IPR. See, that's not quite what I was expecting to see, but maybe I can swap those out into something else. So let me do that real fast. So let me select this here, go to Octane Tools, Material Conversion, and let's do Glossy. And go OK. Yeah, that's better. So diffuse wasn't doing it for me. And Material Conversion, use Glossy, use Specular. OK. And let's see if that got us a better result. I can reload it. Yeah. So now we're actually working with the Octane Render material system and not LightWaves. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you one last thing on here. One other tip or trick is that if you're in the IPR window and you hold Shift and left click, it will open the surface editor for that particular item. So here what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and delete this principled BSDF, and we're going to come over here under materials And there's this one, Octane Render Universal Materials. We'll double click this. And this is going to go into materials like that. And then we are going to let's get a marble texture. I believe this is under procedurals, marble. And we'll just go ahead and pop this into albedo. And if I come back here, you'll see now that that material has been applied to our cube. So if you're at this point right now, you're basically in it. You're in the beginning of the swamp, and it's just a question of going in and clicking and playing around with everything and figuring everything out. But I think this is absolutely fantastic that LightWave Digital is formed this connection to Octane Render, so that now we have a GPU rendering solution in LightWave. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.